Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're going to be talking about the sophomore album from Vance Joy called Nation of Two. Okay, so if you've been following my schedule, which I post on Instagram, you might realize that this isn't originally what I was planning to cover today. I was looking to give Oceans of Slumber this slot, but a few listens into that made it clear it was either going to wind up on the trailing edge, or I was going to need a lot more listens to really process its weight and importance. And when it's over an hour long and embraces a lot of doom tones and textures to complement its progressive and melodic death metal side, that's not something that I really approach lightly, to say the least. And given that Fonte was probably going to demand some serious, lengthy consideration too for his long-awaited sophomore project, I decided to look down to the elevated tiers, and once I moved past the sort of absolutely weird, quasi-insane Bandcamp project that I'm not sure my mind is fully fit to process and will probably wind up on the trailing edge, and a top 10 list that's going to take some time for me to personally rework, I wound up with this. And I had the sinking feeling that all that deliberation I just did would wind up being more interesting or listenable than Vance Joy. But you know what? That's the thing with silent majority acts like this Australian singer-songwriter. Critics like me were often left bewildered or just kind of shrugging with albums like his 2014 debut, maybe able to highlight the one song that kind of stands out, usually the big single, while all the rest of the album is just high and dry. We just don't care. It's not memorable. And with Vance Joy, while he released 7 singles from Dream Your Life Away, the one that caught everybody's attention was Riptide, which peaked at number 30 and somehow got enough points to wind up on the year-end Hot 100 list in 2015. And while the strength of that song alone got Vance Joy to move 2 million copies of his debut album, no, I'm not gonna apologize. I couldn't stand Riptide. Seriously, it was the last song to get cut from my worst hit songs of 2015. The sloppy brittleness, the weak vocals, the utterly wimpy or misconstrued lyrics, the gutless skitters building up to a tempo shift that never pays off properly, the pop culture references that make less and less sense with every single listen. The only thing I can respect about that song was how it might have laid the foundation for Ed Sheeran to take a similar cadence and sound to success with Shape of You. And if that was considered the strong point of the debut album, and even sympathetic critics were not finding that same magic on the follow-up project, we could have something pretty bad on our hands here. But again, there's more people listening to this than every other record I would have covered in its stead, and isn't that a fine indictment of American society? And I've been surprised in this lane before. Hell, Niall Horan came out of nowhere last year with Flicker, and there's at least some similar creative DNA with Vance Joy, so alright, this might not suck. What did I find on Nation of Two? Well, honestly, folks, I was prepared to get good and angry about this one. I still might, but it's been a while since I found any sort of deeper catharsis in ruthlessly dissecting this brand of white guy with acoustic guitar music. But the truth is that while this isn't good at all by any stretch, on the surface, it's not really bad enough to inspire real passion, and it's made for an audience that won't care one way or another about its quality. Of course, you go beyond the surface, and it rapidly becomes apparent the only reason Vance Joy gets a pass at all, or even has a career, is because his audience doesn't care enough to challenge him. Unfortunately for him, I have no such compunctions, because this album, Nation of Two by Vance Joy, it's not good. So let's start off with the least objectionable thing here, the instrumentation and the production. And you know what, for records like this, it's a simple enough sell to get that audience. Keep the acoustic guitars warm with your 3 or 4 note melody. Maybe add some softer percussion or some piano. The reason this sort of folk works and has worked for decades is that it cultivates that sense of intimate atmosphere. And yet, 2 songs in, we're getting faster grooves with a little bass to speak of against increasingly brittle snares and cracks. And even the introduction of horns that continue to crop up all over this album with little body or presence beyond trying to blow these songs into being so much bigger than they really should be. And I'm honestly a little bit mystified why Vance Joy thought this would work on songs like Lay It On Me or We're Going Home, or especially One of These Days. He's no Mumford & Sons or Of Monsters and Men, and given that he did produce this entire album himself, it's clear he's struggling to give these tracks propulsive presence beyond the tempo, which is a twofold problem when your production is typically framed to be a lot more intimate and you're not willing to give your bass guitar or kick drum significant pounding presence or groove. Instead, you get lots of multi-track millennial whoops and hand claps and some attempts at syncopation on songs like Take Your Time to highlight a growing sense of clumsiness that eventually comes to characterize really the entire damn album. From awkward pre-choruses like on Alone With Me to increasingly limited guitar work in the compositions. And look, I'm not expecting any sort of grandiose classical acoustic solos in the subgenre that Vance Joy is working in, but if you're gonna fill up space with underweight millennial whooping that can feel increasingly dissonant with the acoustic tones that you're choosing, that's a problem. You're just filling up space and it doesn't sound good. Now, in truth, I was willing to give Vance Joy a little bit more of a pass here. Most of his whole appeal is in his youthful naivete and a lot of his sincerity, with every willowy voiced high school kid strumming an acoustic guitar and crooning love songs for the girl he's crazy about. Basically the Plain White T's version of the modern 2010s. But the more listens I gave this project, the more Vance Joy's voice grated on me, and a big part of this can be linked to his choice of vocal tone. He basically has two registers that he uses on this album. His flat, slightly more nasal tone, which is kind of tolerable and like fire, if unremarkable in comparison with every other modern folk singer. And yes, he does deserve the comparison because he's 30, and a higher pitched warble nearing falsetto that was grating on Riptide and is just as grating on this project. What's abundantly clear is that for the songs trying to bring more bombast and tempo is that Vance Joy cannot sell them. And while on a few tracks he gives himself a slightly fuller vocal arrangement with some multi-tracking that's not bad. Look, he's not Ed Sheeran, he's not Marcus Mumford, he's not James Bay. His upper register does not have that level of edge, and that's not counting songs like Alone With Me, where he picks a style of his delivery that just does not mesh with the content or the overall tone of the song, which leads to the sort of dissonance that you really can't excuse for such simple songs. There's a pretty basic formula. If you're screwing it up, again, there's a problem. And really, if you're looking for where that dissonance becomes a serious issue, it's most in the songwriting and lyrics, which is not a good sign at all, given that when you have a minimalist white guy with acoustic guitar arrangement, that's basically the entire foundation of your appeal. Now, going back to Vance Joy's persona, a lot of his appeal is rooted in a certain homegrown relatability. These are simple love songs for the most part, and so as long as the fundamentals are sound, the bar is really not high for his storytelling and winning over that audience. And yet somehow Vance Joy struggles even there. There's no damn excuse for so many verses that don't even try to rhyme or feel painfully lacking in greater detail to flesh out these stories. You'd think somebody with his age and life experience would have enough to add some meat to these songs. But there's also something strangely childlike about the writing of some of these tunes. Most notably a noxious sense of presumptuous entitlement that isn't even sold properly with the charisma to make it remotely tolerable. And yeah, it starts out early. He's a drunken mess on Lay It On Me, and he hopes that for all of his defenses they can come down so she can lay it all on him. But I'm not getting any sense of emotional distance or defense mechanism that he's using anywhere on this album, or how We're Going Home in his language choices. They are so vague that while it seems like the meaning is kind of fleeting on the first verse, he's going for a huge romantic chorus where they're gonna go home together, which gets kind of obnoxious when he also does it on Call If You Need Me, the first song, as it's clear he did not spark a flame with this girl, but she winds up coming back to him anyway, or at least it's implied. Bit of a contradiction there, I'm not sure I buy it. And yet, the deeper into this record, the worse it gets. The opening line of Take Your Time is that there is an ocean inside his head, implying greater depths that are plainly not there, and turbulence I'm not sure I buy either. But don't worry, if you put in the time and break down all of his non-existent defenses, it will all be worth it. And then there's I'm With You, which seemed to actually be playing a little bit slower as he's trying to get over an ex and he doesn't want to rush things with this new girl. But by the time we get to the bridge and he's saying, "And it's high time that you love me," a line so damn pompous, I don't think anybody could have credibly sold it. Next is Like Gold, a song that I actually kind of appreciated in cutting the chords to the past, except by the time we get to the bridge, it seems like he's going for a big romantic reconnection, and the history being disregarded might just be everything that he screwed up before. But the absolute worst case here is One of These Days, probably one of the worst songs I've heard all year, where he's literally describing how this person opposite him needs to get her life together, and at the moment that she stops looking and gives up her chance, he'll come find her, one of these days. So, alright, on a record where you're talking about letting down all of your defenses and dealing with your issues, you can get this condescending and sanctimonious? Are you serious? Now at this point, no, I'm done with this. I could discuss how the jaunty melodies don't work at all on Bonnie and Clyde, an utterly generic song about living life to the last because you don't know when you'll go, which only barely makes sense before you get a second verse that goes nowhere and the tone doesn't click at all, and then snaps to events of him growing up on Little Boy, which only further highlights his immaturity with some really sloppy vocal mixing. But really, what's the point of me saying anything more here? Again, there is a limit to how much a critic can really castigate this amateurish junk, because the silent majority audience doesn't give a shit about critics that will buy nearly more than any other record that I will give critical acclaim this year. And they won't care about the gutless immaturity, or the ugly framing, or the underweight production, or the utterly by-the-numbers composition and songwriting. It doesn't register on that level for them, and if it does, it's really that bad. And honestly, I'm not sure it quite gets that appalling in the same way like AJR was. But for everybody else, there's absolutely no reason to buy this album. There's nothing as immediately distinctive in sound or content as Riptide, and the stuff that comes close to being as distinctive does not work at all. For me, solid 3 out of 10, definitely not recommended. And again, while I don't expect this to change anybody's mind, in fact, I'm probably gonna piss a lot of you off, there are records in this lane with some quality. Look at Niall Horan's Flicker, and I have to hope that, at least by calling out the bad stuff, we can move closer to celebrating the good. In other words, skip it. It's not good. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I know I kind of got a little testy there, but considering how bad my day was, and considering the filming of this was absolute hell, I hope you forgive me there. Even still, this record sucks. You want to buy it, links in the description below. Polls up there for you all to tell me how wrong I am, but really, with records like this, and what I described to you, I'm really not that wrong. There's not a lot of an excuse for interpretation when you get to look at some of these lyrics. Beyond that, though, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. Hopefully I'll be a little happier next time. And if you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process, link to my Patreon is right over there. Described a lot of that scheduling process before in the actual review itself, but for 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. Schedule, as I said before, it's on my Instagram. But until next time, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.